Do you find catching up with the news miserable and frustrating, especially when it comes to the Russian invasion of Ukraine? I sure do, but that might be because I'm a childless, miserable cat, French bulldog, lady. Anyways, I digress. If you find yourself in a similar situation, you're in the right place. I'm Yulia, JD Vance's favorite type of woman, as it turns out, and every day I'll be picking out 4 to 6 news stories that I, in my humble opinion, consider the most impactful. And we'll be talking about them together in the comments so you don't have to suffer alone and I don't have to suffer alone. Let's dive right in. The 2024 Olympics have just started and we already have a scandal involving none other than Russia. Seriously, can we ban them from the civilized world already? 3 athletes who publicly supported the Kremlin's war in Ukraine will compete in the 2024 Olympics in Paris, despite rules requiring neutrality, according to Politico. What does neutrality mean in this case? You are not allowed, if you're from Belarus or Russia, to support the war, the invasion of Ukraine. And that includes social media posts, posting with your brother who's in the military, liking posts that have anything to do with the military symbols or the invasion of Ukraine, and of course, Russian athletes can't manage to even do that. The athletes who have shown support for the Russian invasion of Ukraine include tennis player Yelena Vesnina and Diana Schneider, the cyclist Yelena Ivanchenko, all of whom are set to compete in Paris. The Ukrainian Olympic Committee has also called for the exclusion of the trampolinist Angela Bladzeva, who has posted videos featuring pro-Russian military symbols on social media. Seriously, these rules came out so long ago. They came out in 2022. It's been 2 years. And every single Olympic or otherwise sports event has Russian athletes that are competing under a white flag and are supposed to have nothing to do with the military, constantly showing their support for the military in broad public, whether it be on social media or whether it them being literally in the Russian military. How are we still allowing this? Honestly, it's mind-blowing. Furthermore, Russian tennis player Shamil Tarpishev, known for his active support of the mobilization of Russian athletes to fight against Ukraine, will be present at the Games, according to the Russian propaganda agency TASS. This situation has angered Ukrainian officials and athletes, many of whom have faced significant hardships due to the ongoing conflict. Despite the IOC having a committee responsible for vetting athletes' eligibility, some appear to have bypassed the scrutiny. A Dutch organization, Global Rights Compliance, found that 33 of the 57 Russian and Belarusian athletes approved for the Olympics had actually supported the war in Ukraine. That is more than half. That is more than half of the athletes that actually openly support the war. Who is vetting them? And the biggest problem with this and why it is so incredibly unfair is because Ukrainian athletes don't only have to train in excruciating circumstances, especially when we have blackouts and we have power for 2 to 4 hours a day, they train in conditions that are hell. Imagine a sauna and imagine training in a sauna. That's pretty much what's happening, and that's the least of our problems. Ukraine this year sent its smallest Olympic team yet, and the world is questioning it. How did that happen? Because Ukraine has to be present on the world stage, and all the exposure we can get matters. Well, how are we supposed to send athletes to the Olympics if 1/3 of them serves in the front lines, 1/3 of them has been killed by Russia, and the other third has to train in excruciating circumstances, and that third is still making it to the Olympics and winning medals. Which, hey, congratulations, Оля Харлан, you rock.
Я присвячую це всій Україні, друзі, це вам. Я присвячую це нашим захисникам, захисницям. Я хочу присвятити це, на жаль, тим спортсменам, які не можуть сюди приїхати, не могли сюди приїхати, тому що їх вбила Росія. Я присвячую це їм.
Another story, another issue with Russia. They just love to be in the spotlight, don't they? In an interview with Suspilne, Timothy Snyder, a historian and professor at Yale University, stated that Russia is aware that it will lose the war without its influence in the West. He highlighted that Russian propaganda focuses significantly on individuals they consider allies, such as Donald Trump, Nigel Farage, and Marine Le Pen. Russia supports and promotes these figures in the West, who in turn inadvertently further Russia's interests. We will actually talk a little more about that later in this segment because Donald Trump has said some things, and he has said some things that, to me personally, I don't know how people still don't see that he is Putin's little lap chihuahua dog. But I digress. Snyder clarified that he does not claim all these individuals are directly Russian agents, but emphasized that Russia relies heavily on Western domestic politics, particularly American politics, for its strategies. He suggested that until January 2025, when the next US president will be inaugurated, Russia will likely avoid serious discussions about peace. And the reason that might be happening is because Putin is banking on Trump winning and forcing Ukraine into surrender. Because here's the situation. I personally don't think Trump is paid by Russia. I think the situation is that he's very liked by Putin and Russia, and they finance his presence. They give him a lot of boost in the info space. They really do promote him and his narratives because he promotes them and their narratives. Why would he do that if he's not paid? Well, it's a bit of a Napoleon complex here. Putin is this big, great world leader, right? I mean, or was, but we don't see Trump keeping up with the current events very well. So he was, and Trump really wants approval. And you can see that from his rallies. You can see that from how he treats his supporters. He wants to be in the spotlight. And there is this world leader, Putin, who doesn't like anyone, who gives him compliments and seems to like him. That's a big ego boost. Personally, I think that's one of the reasons why he is so in love with Russia. This next one is, shockingly, not about Russia, though they might as well become their new oblast. Meet Russia's baby little brother in the EU, Orban's Hungary. Hungary eased entry conditions for Russians and Belarusians without public announcement, according to Deutsche Welle. Hungary has quietly simplified entry conditions for Russians and Belarusians after Prime Minister Viktor Orban's visit to Moscow. Budapest included citizens of Russia and Belarus in the National Card Program. This program allows applicants to work in Hungary for 2 years with the possibility of extension. The German publication R&D reports that national card holders are not subject to special verification at the European level, raising concerns among Hungary's neighbors. The Hungarian government previously announced it expects about 65,000 wage earners with families this year. And that comes right after Poland has called on Hungary to exit the EU and NATO because of how close to Russia they are and because of how much they refuse to cease their relationship with Russia, unlike everyone else in the European Union. If you ask me, we have an enemy within. And Orban seems like your typical Russian sympathizer who might have been trained by the KGB at some point, but that's just an assumption. He just, fits the bill. In an interview with R&D, MEP Serhiy Lahodinski expressed concerns about allowing entry into an EU country without proper inspection, especially given Russia's hybrid attacks aimed at weakening Europe. However, he also cautioned against labeling all Russian citizens. And this is not the first scandal for Hungary involving citizenship, Hungarian green cards, and Russians. Around 2 years ago, in 2022, there was a massive CIA investigation that uncovered a national security breach, both for the EU and the US. And the responsible culprit? Hungary. How? Because they were offering and selling Hungarian passports to pretty much anyone who would ask. You would just have to forge some paperwork proving that you have Hungarian heritage as far as 3 generations back? And that resulted in a lot of Russian spies and a lot of Russian citizens in general just purchasing Hungarian passports. You would think, okay, well, then they want to live in Hungary. How does that concern the EU and the US? That concerns the EU and the US because they get a free pass into all of the EU and also 90 days visa-free into the US. That's a dream for a Russian spy. You forge some documents, change your name, get a European citizenship, fast-tracked, and you're free to go anywhere you want. And after that, Hungary is still messing with immigration laws and responding to Poland's warning that no one wants them in the EU anymore, they decide to make the situation worse? That makes... I mean, it does make a lot of sense for Hungary, TBH, and for Orban, but in general, if it wasn't them, why? Why would you do that? Hungary's eased visa restrictions for Russians raised security concerns once again, says EPP leader Manfred Weber. Weber, head of the European People's Party, has raised serious national security concerns over Hungary's recent decision to ease visa restrictions for Russian visitors. In a letter obtained by the Financial Times, he warned that this move could allow unverified Russians to travel freely across much of the EU, potentially opening door to espionage. I mean, personally, in my very humble opinion in this case, it's done specifically for those purposes. I think that Orban and Putin have the same goal, and you could see that from exactly how difficult it is to convince Hungary to do anything with EU interests at heart or Ukraine's interests at heart, and how difficult it is to convince them to do something that is not in Russia's interests. Weber has written to European Council President Charles Michel, urging that this issue be addressed at the next Leaders' Summit in October. Hungary has introduced a fast-track visa system for citizens of 8 countries, including Russia and Belarus, allowing entry without security checks or other restrictions. Weber questioned the necessity of Hungary's new migration system, warning that it would create significant loopholes for espionage and allow large numbers of Russians to enter Hungary with minimal oversight, posing a serious risk to national security. He expressed concerns that such a policy could enable Russians to bypass EU restrictions with the Schengen area. Yeah, and it would enable them to buy parts in the EU for drones and missiles and chips from washing machines, and bypass all of the sanctions, well, not all, but a lot of them, that have been imposed on Russia since 2022. Lovely. I mean, again, let's track back here. As I said, I think it's funny that European leaders think that it might open the door to Russian espionage because it is 100% designed to do specifically that. The letter calls on EU leaders to take urgent countermeasures to protect the integrity of the Schengen area, mitigate the security risks already present, and prevent similar initiatives by other member states in the future. Here's the drill. The biggest problem here is that the EU does not have a procedure for expulsion of countries that seriously threaten the national security of the Union. And Hungary has been doing that for at least the past 2.5 years. If we're being very honest and very real, Hungary doesn't bring anything to the EU. It is the second largest recipient of monetary help from the EU. And frankly, it looks like the only reason they stay in the Union is to be Russia's little spy buddy and to get free money from the EU. So isn't it time to create an expulsion procedure? Or some sort of a special circumstance procedure that will finally put an end to this? Let me know what you think. And of course, it would not be a news show if we didn't mention the American election. Specifically, Trump's choice of a running mate, and all the memes that came with it. Now, normally, virality is a good thing. That's what you want. Just look at Kamala. She's killing it. But not in JD Vance's case. Hold that thought, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. But for now, let's get the serious stuff out of the way first. Donald Trump, if re-elected as US president, might insist on Ukraine's refusal to join NATO. Might. According to the Financial Times, JD Vance, our favorite Republican vice presidential candidate, has supported the idea of a neutral Ukraine. I love it when they say neutral Ukraine because Ukraine has been very neutral up until 2022. I'm going to give you a little bit of an information here that you might not have heard. More than half of Ukraine's population did not want to join NATO in 2014. Before 2014, it was most of Ukraine's population. Their opinion only changed after the 2022 Russia's full-scale invasion. So, JD, Ukraine has been pretty neutral. Suggesting this approach could guarantee both Kyiv's independence and its neutrality in Vance's idea. He mentioned in an interview with the New York Times in June that neutrality is a significant concern for Russia. Why are we concerned with what Russia wants? Here is the drill, right? A US presidential candidate, a country that is Ukraine's ally, is concerned with what Russia wants out of Ukraine. Yeah, that's not fishy at all. Ukraine, on the other hand, is adamant about restoring its full territorial integrity, including Crimea. The US and its European allies have pledged to support Ukraine for as long as necessary and have stated they will not impose peace terms on the Ukrainians. Gideon Rahman, chief international affairs columnist at the Financial Times, highlighted that the primary obstacle to peace is not just Ukraine's reluctance to make territorial concessions, but also Russia's demand for a settlement involving the control of 80% of Ukraine's territory, which, by the way, is about the size of Denmark, which it currently does not possess. Ukrainians require guarantees that Russia will not use a peace settlement to rearm and launch further offensives. Kyiv's stance is that Ukraine should join NATO to be covered by the alliance's collective security guarantees. The recent NATO summit declared that the future of Ukraine is in NATO, but specified this would occur when the allies agree and the conditions are met. Of course, that is America's stance today, but that stance comes into a big question when we look at Trump's ties to Russia, the fact that there is multiple evidence that Russian bot farms were responsible for the outcomes of the 2016 election and the promotion of Trump's campaign, and the fact that his running mate now is not Mike Pence, who Trump inadvertently tried to hang during the January 6th storm of the Capitol via his followers. But I digress. Now it's J.D. Vance. No one tries to hang him. And he seems to hate Ukraine. We know that the election is coming up in November, and we know that right now there is a very, very big race between the Democrats and Republicans. In Ukraine's case, of course, it makes a lot more sense for us to root for Democrats to win. They have been supporting us unequivocally, and they have a track record of having Ukraine's best interests in mind. So how do the Democrats win the election in the US, provided that there is electoral college? Well, they need to win the swing states. And how do you do that? According to historian and Yale University professor Timothy Snyder, there is a potential influence of Americans with Ukrainian roots in the upcoming presidential election. So, surprise, surprise, Ukraine comes to save the day again. How does that happen? There is a large Ukrainian diaspora both in Michigan, a swing state, and Pennsylvania, a swing state. In Pennsylvania, about 1% of voters are Ukrainian diaspora, and in Michigan, it's 0.5. And those numbers could really influence the election and swing the victory towards the Democrats. But there is one tiny little but. A lot of Ukrainian diaspora, historically, is registered Republicans. How did that happen? Well, Ukrainians are so scared of communism and anything that reminds them of the USSR, that liberalism, socialism, and anything that leans left seems scary and a little too communist resemblant to them. So do we think Ukrainians are going to vote Republican this year? I think not. Because this election is not necessarily between Republicans and Democrats. It's between Trump and keeping a normal standard of living and a democracy. I don't think Ukrainian voters are going to give their vote to Trump, given his stance and politics about Ukraine. So let's hope, because they really do make a difference. Now back to Vance. He's going viral in a way no one would want to go viral, making rounds on the internet, similarly to that poor surfer in the Olympic Games that ended up like this. And here is some further proof that J.D. Vance's virality is not the kind anyone would want. The average approval rating in the past decade or so of a presidential running mate is about 19 points. J.D. Vance sits at -6. He sits at a negative approval rating. And you would think it's just the independent voters that don't like him. No. He managed to piss off Republicans as well. You know, calling all women that don't want to have children miserable, childless cat ladies.
Effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too.
I must say, as a woman who doesn't want children, and doesn't have a cat. I do have a French bulldog, and I love her very much. I'm not that miserable, but, you know, to each their own. J.D. Vance also somehow managed to make headlines in the New York Times with his book, where the newspaper misquoted a story, quoting a page number 2 that later turned out doesn't exist, detailing J.D. Vance's romance with an inanimate object. I can't say this on air, but John Oliver can, so take a look.
J.D. Vance sucks so much that it says something that for a few days this week, the internet ran wild with a joke tweet that he was the first VP pick to have admitted in a New York Times bestseller to fucking an inside-out latex glove shoved between 2 couch cushions with a citation to a page number from his memoir. And look, let me be clear, that is not true. It is not in his book. But I think the reason it spread so fast might be that A, nobody read that fucking book, and B, it was incredibly easy to believe, because if you asked me to draw a man that fucks his couch, 10 times out of 10, I'm drawing this guy. If you asked me to play 2 truths and a lie with this man, before he even opened his mouth, I shout, the truth is he fucks his couch. Because I've never seen someone with more couch fucker energy. It even got to the point the AP felt the need to publish a fact check headlined, "No, J.D. Vance did not have sex with a couch," only to then take it down with the link leading to page unavailable, which somehow makes this even funnier. The AP later explained its decision to pull the piece by saying the story did not go through their standard editing process. And no shit it didn't, because there's an obvious problem with that original headline. And the reason I know that is we care a lot about facts and precise phrasing on this show. So I can tell you, you can't say J.D. Vance didn't have sex with a couch definitively. You can say that he didn't write about doing that in his book, because that is provable. But that's not the same as asserting he never fucked a couch, especially because he hasn't officially denied it. But we wanted to give him the opportunity to do that. So we contacted the Vance campaign this week, calling one of their spokespeople. And when we asked, and I quote, "Has Senator Vance ever had sex with a couch?" they, and this is true, hung up on us.
In fact, JD is doing so bad among all of the voting population that John Oliver took 20 minutes of his Britain's most popular show just to make fun of him. In fact, he's so unpopular that he managed to alienate even the most devout MAGA followers. How do you do that? Well, here is a little recording, and also a great beat, of J.D. Vance talking about his running mate, former President Donald Trump, over the years. Take a look at their warm relationship and his idea of a person who he now is choosing to be his president.
So this is really who Donald Trump chose as his running mate?
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. It makes you think that at a fundamental level, this is sort of a he said, she said, right? And at the end of the day, do you believe Donald Trump, who always tells the truth? Just kidding. Or do you believe that woman on that tape?
No, I cannot stand Trump because I think he's a fraud. Well, I think he's a total fraud that is exploiting these people, who is a total fraud.
Like you said, I agree with you on Trump because I don't think that he's the person. I don't think he actually cares about folks.
Definitely, there is definitely an element of Donald Trump support that has its basis in racism or xenophobia. I think there's a chance, if I feel like Trump has a really good chance of winning, that I might have to hold my nose and vote for Hillary Clinton. I think that I'm going to vote for. I'm going to vote third party because I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place.
And these are just a few things that J.D. Vance has made himself go viral for in the past, I want to say 2 weeks. So I'm excited for more. In the meanwhile, you tell me if you think J.D. Vance is a good candidate to run with anyone as their vice president and what you think of that move. Because personally, I think, and I myself am a Democrat, so I'm not interested in Trump doing well, but I personally think politically, picking J.D. Vance was a bit of a silly move. I understand that Trump probably wanted to appeal to his already voters. But those people, they don't decide the election. The independent voters do. And J.D. Vance is much more radical than Trump, which means that all of those independent voters who were on the fence of whether to vote for Trump or not are now definitely not going to vote Trump because of Vance's policies. So yeah, let me know what you think of this situation. And while you're at it, please don't forget to leave this video a like and send it to a friend so we can continue creating this segment for you. Now, it's a very new segment, and there is always room for improvement. So please do let us know down in the comments, which I'm 100% going to be reading, I promise you, what kind of topics you would like me to cover next. And if you have any questions and you ask them down below, I'm going to add a tiny little bit of time at the end of each of these segments to answer them for you. So don't forget to do that, and don't forget to subscribe to The Gaze Media to see me and other journalists tell you a lot about politics, especially involving Ukraine and the Western world. And when I say The Gaze, I mean Gaze. You got it.